Live, here, there, and there. So, why things click on, like always, this is Dr. Paul. You're welcome to Bridges Live. And I have Meosha Hudson on. Before we get there, I want to say, we're in a fantastic month. That I can say. We're in a fantastic month. Well, all life is fantastic, and all things are fantastic. But we're in February, which is Black History Month. And we talk a lot about, people have talked a lot about the history of blacks, the history of, they got Cicely Tyson on everything on TV now, which is great. I have nothing, but we're missing a couple of things. And here's what I mean by what we're missing. I think we're missing facts about why we are so happy that we can talk about our history, because so many things gets missed. And if people see the American Red Cross on the sign behind me, it's because, one, I'm on the board of the Montgomery, Frederick, and Howard County, and the American Red Cross here, and we do so much. We go unnoticed, and we need to change that, because in the black community, people don't know much about the Red Cross, which is sad, because as Meosha is going to talk about the American Red Cross, that we should know so much more than we don't. But first, introduce yourself, Meosha. I'm so happy to be on with me on Bridges Live. And please, introduce yourself. What do you do? Where are you from? Why in the hell are you on the show? And all that good stuff.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dyer. So how do I break that out? So first of all, I am Meosha Hudson, and I am with the American Red Cross, and I represent our Chesapeake and Potomac, which is a fancy way of saying Maryland, D.C., and Virginia regions. I've been here at the American Red Cross for going on 5 years now. I'm very proud to be a part of this organization. And prior to joining the American Red Cross, I spent probably a good 18 years in commercial level telecom, which is quite a transition in career paths for me, but it is me being now realigned with my calling, which has always been public and community health. And I'm very passionate about how that impacts the Black community, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in addition to being a part of the American Red Cross, I am also a mother of 2 amazing children. I have...
you got to get that in there, because they will hang you out to dry if you don't mention, like, Mom, you were on podcasts, you are TV, and you're not even going to say, thanks, Mom, or...
Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my 2 amazing children, which are the lifelines for me, and they motivate me in everything that I do. And so I'm very privileged to be a mom of 2 amazing children. I have a 22-year-old daughter who is also a frontline worker. She's actually a nursing student. She wants to pursue her calling, which is in healing, and she's studying nursing at Hudson University, and she also works on the front line at GBMC Hospital as a nurse assistant. So she's getting a real look at the job firsthand, which is why I call it a calling. I don't think nursing is something we gravitate to because we're looking to get rich quick. I think it definitely that is the lifeline of the healthcare industry, our beloved nurses. So I'm very proud of her in that respect.
Well, my wife's a nurse.
I was going to say, I know your wife as well. She is also a registered nurse with a very extensive career and experience in terms of healthcare and being on the front line. So
you better mention your husband, or he's gonna be hurt.
And then I have my son. My son is 18 years old, so you can imagine with that. Oh, you have 4 daughters, but
I have 7 daughters.
Oh, you have 7 daughters. Okay,
and 2 sons.
Oh, yeah. So you've all right. You've dibbled and dabbled into fathering male human beings, so you know how that's always an interesting ride. But I'm very grateful. Both my kids, they're literally, very special beings, and I'm sure we all think of our children in that way. So that's a big part of what motivates me in everything that I do. And so my roots are probably, I would have to say, is in the Midwest. That's where I was born and raised. Born in Chicago, grew up in a small town called Oak Park. Very great little place, nice area. Really enjoyed growing up there and being a part of the landscape of Chicago. And I eventually left to pursue my academic journey, which landed me at the University of Maryland, which is where I attended, and I'm proud to be a Terrapin for life. So I decided I enjoyed and loved this area so much that there is no way they could get me back in the Midwest with that Arctic hot, we call it, really, really cold. So I love this area and the diversity and the essentially easy winters. I can pretty much handle these, but different ball game in the Midwest. So that's really my story. My role at the American Red Cross is pretty unique in the respect that I work in a role where my job and my responsibility is to build the relationships and the bridges between the American Red Cross and the Black and African American communities, as well as some Latino engagement as well. But right now my plate is really, really full with pulling together the groundwork that is required and will be required to really pull in the Black and African American community as it relates to the contribution, the continued contribution, I should say. We've been a part of the American Red Cross since day one.
Right.
Many don't know that, but I'm always excited to share that story and share that journey because we are continuing to make history here at the American Red Cross and trailblaze, as I like to call it.
And now explain to people, why is it something that people have just missed about the American Red Cross and the African community? Explain what they have missed and not understanding why we are part of this journey.
Well, I would have to say, I wouldn't say that it was missed. I think it's always been known that there is more that can be done and that needs to be done. And I would have to say that the recent focus, the recent light that's been shined on where there are gaps really came about when we realized how short our patients with sickle cell disease was coming up when it comes to having the right optimal blood matches to help treat that disease. It's a really horrible disease and it's a really rough thing to live with. So counting on blood transfusions is a big part of what helps that community thrive and live their best life that they can, under these conditions. So we realized there was a huge gap. We realized that we're very involved in the Black and African American community. We have a really diverse workforce, but we weren't seeing a lot of that transpire into the community as it relates to really being on the ground. And so we took a hard look at ourselves. I would probably have to say a lot of the activity, the civil unrest of 2020 brought a lot of things to light. And that, like many other organizations, caused a lot of people to look in the mirror, take a strong, hard look at yourself and what are you doing to dismantle the systemic racism that we still find ourselves fighting today. And that is probably the spark that put the fire underneath our leadership to really be bold and be brave and be courageous in terms of blazing another trail of really living up to the commitment that we've made for many years to be humanitarians.
And I think American Red Cross, I think people should be proud of that. I think sometimes people look at what they have done saying, why didn't they do? We need to get past that type of statement. And if someone recognizes whatever company, whatever person says, I'm going to change and take a hard look and I'm going to be different, that should be applauded.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that, because that's where we are now. Under the leadership of Gail McGovern, who is probably by far one of the most humble, effective, and genuine C-level leaders that I've ever seen, I can tell you from having the chance to actually have conversation that this isn't just your typical CEO of an organization. This person eats, sleeps, breathes, and lives to this mission. And just to clarify, the mission of the American Red Cross is truly to alleviate human suffering and to take a bold stance in the face of that level of suffrage. And that includes our Black and brown brothers and sisters. I mean, the level of suffering that we've sustained as a community is mind-boggling. But as a humanitarian organization, it is our role, it is our duty, it is our responsibility to stand in the face of that suffering and provide as much reassurance, support, and aid that we possibly can. And that doesn't just go overseas. That means right here on the ground in our own communities. And so we decided there's more that we can do. There's more that we need to do. And the focus that we have on the blood supply is just one of a very layered mission that we have to diversity and inclusion.
Because there's a lot of fingers. It's a tree that has a lot of branches to it, and it affects so much. And the partners that we've developed partners with in the community, in the United States, around the world, so we can help our communities, right?
Absolutely.
So now here's a twisted question, is because why do you think the Black community, the Black and brown community, never sought for the Red Cross for something? Because we're more than there than when your house burns down or we need a replacement, because there's a lot of education there we could provide. There's a lot of education. So why do you think it was never connected?
That's a really great question, and I have to say that I believe that there was a disconnect because there wasn't the very specific focus that you need to give to a unique community.
Right.
And I would have to say, even though the brand is iconic, there's not many people in the United States or abroad that have not either seen the Red Cross logo or know who we are, what we do. And I think you're right that many people think of us when it comes to home fires. We're usually first on the ground, even before our first responders are there, and either we're arriving at the same time, but we are there no matter where that home fire takes place, and we are providing housing, sheltering, funds. So much of what we do is being there, whether it's local, whether it's across the country, whether it's across the seas. So I think the disconnect is more about the outreach portion of what needs to happen to gain that trust in the community, because I think the Black community looks at the American Red Cross more neutral than they do negative. It's like, I take them or leave them. And what we're trying to do is build that connection where it is known that we are here for this community, just as we are any other community.
And the funny thing is I got a side note, but one of the things is that we also help the first responders. So the people who are responding to disasters, we are in support of them also, and giving them the food, the supplies, or anything they might need where they have to focus on their particular specialty, that they can do their job and not worry about the back end. So the Red Cross is also there for the people who are in disaster and the people who are responding to disaster. So it is a unity or a community effort of who the American Red Cross helps. Now, the other note is Black community is they don't trust people. If you go down the street and knock on their door, they're like, I'm not expecting nobody.
Sure.
I'm not answering that door, and because I know I can hear my mother in my ear right now. Boy, what are you doing with that door? I'm like, someone knocked. I don't know anybody come inside. So that's a tough crowd to get to if they're never going to come to the door to talk to you.
That's right. That's right. And I would have to say, especially for our ground campaign, like something like Sound the Alarm, where we are literally in the community and knocking on doors, we've been met with a lot of, how can I say this? What are you doing here? And you've got the wrong house. But so we try to lead in and make sure folks know, like we're flashing, hey, Red Cross, and we get this a lot in the brown community as well, because they're like, is it ICE? Are you all here to set us up? Like, what's going on? So we have to show up when we want nothing, show up and be there when there's a need, and then also
wait for them.
Wait until that. It's a natural progression. You know, you can't force these things. And so what we're hoping to do is...
Or give away food.
And we do that as well, especially during disaster. That's a big part of what we do, which is why it's important for people to understand that we're 90% volunteer organization, and we're essentially 100% donations in terms of how we sustain. And so we have to be very careful and methodical in how we use those donated dollars, and that's why it all goes back into the community.
90% of the all donation goes back into the community. So out of $1, 90 cents goes back into the community.
Absolutely.
And the other 10 cents pays for people like you. You probably get a half a cent, while people get other half of cents. But that's basically how it's structured.
Yeah, it's structured to sustain the overhead, which is why we are very methodical, you know, about that aspect of our operation. But we are at the mercy of our donors, whether it's a blood donor or a financial donor, or it's someone that's donating their time to help us out here on the front line when it comes to disaster and other things that we do on the humanitarian front.
So let's get into sickle cell. First, for the people who don't know, people probably heard of sickle cell. I know I personally have the sickle cell trait. I've caught malaria. So explain what sickle cell is, and then let's go to there why it only affects the Black community.
Sure. You know, I think that's really important to cover, because I am still really surprised at how many people I run into that don't really know what sickle cell is. They heard about it. They knew a friend that had a cousin, or somebody, a cousin of a cousin that had it. But I will tell you, sickle cell disease is the most common genetic disorder here in the United States. And it actually affects almost all ethnicities, but it does primarily affect people from Africa, India, Central and South America, the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and the Caribbean. And that's usually a misconception. When people hear sickle cell, they think, oh, that's the Black disease, but it really isn't.
Right.
However, in the United States, we're disproportionately impacted, and it has a lot to do with the diversity of our actual blood phenotype. Having come over from Africa and having the propensity to still have sickled shaped red blood cells, which actually work for you in tropical areas where you tend to have malaria, which is why most of the regions that I mentioned to you are considered malaria zones. And so people will have that trait, and it actually protects them from something like malaria. Whereas when you're out of that environment, it now becomes kind of a hindering. It's like, what are you lingering around for? I don't need you anymore, because I'm no longer geographically impacted due to being in a place like the Americas or Europe, or, you know, traveling beyond that native land. And so that's how it came to be. And that's why it's so common in Black and African Americans, because we're all descendants of Africa.
Correct.
And 1 in 12 Black or African American people actually carry the trait and don't know it. So it's still very prevalent in our communities, and something that is probably overlooked because of how sickle cell is not properly handled in the healthcare arena. There are still plenty of medical professionals that still don't know how to handle a sickle cell patient.
And that's
but
surprising.
It's not contagious. It's a hereditary condition, just like eye color. And so you can inherit it from both parents,
Right.
or you can carry the gene and potentially pass it on, which is why, knowing if you have the trait is imperative, because that might be the deal maker in terms of who you decide to procreate with, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where some things could have been avoided. And so, on the physical level, sickle cell disease is excruciating. What's happening is the blood cells, the red blood cells that are sickled, are unable to carry the oxygen through your body, including the vital organs. Right. And that's where the pain crisis comes in, because now all of your organs are restricted of that crucial oxygen that is what the normal, healthy, biplate shaped red blood cell carries throughout the body. So that person will be in really extreme pain. A child can experience a stroke, when you
because
have a 6, 7 year, exactly, because of the lack of the oxygen that's now getting to the brain. There's a blockage there. And then you sustain tissue and organ damage.
So how does blood work? People probably would say, so what does blood have to do? Why is my donation of blood help a sickle cell patient? I mean, how does that
help? So a person with normal, healthy, good red blood cells can help a patient in a crisis, because as that patient receives the transfusion of these whole, healthy, suitable blood cells, it essentially overpowers the cells that are sickled. And so it's carrying oxygen through to the body in the way that it was meant for the body to operate. So having a transfusion from a person that is an exact ethnic match or a close ethnic match is essential, because a sickle cell patient can require anywhere from 50 to 100 blood transfusions, in a designated amount of time.
Wow.
So,
wow.
It's not a one-off. It's not, boom, one transfusion, they're good to go. Yeah. A pain crisis can come for many reasons. And so we have to make sure that blood is available, and we're counting on Black and brown people to donate in order to make sure we can take the proper care of the patients on the other end of that.
From what you've noticed, is it a disproportion of Black and brown people donating blood? Like they're just not donating?
Yeah, that's a big challenge and struggle that we live with, and we try. It's an ongoing concern that we are really committed to figuring out how can we crack this shell. And to be honest, there's not enough blood donors, period. 3% of the 35% of people that are eligible to donate. Just 3% of an already compromised number. And of that 3%, Black and African Americans and Latinos make up an even tinier section of that. So it's...
I don't want to be political, but it sounds like a voting record.
Dr. Dyer, I have no comment on that assessment that you're making over there. But I personally like to look at, and maybe that's where I'm going wrong, I shouldn't look at donating blood as kind of like a civil duty to vote. You want your voice heard. But
it really is your civic duty. In this, when it comes to servicing, if people thought more of servicing humanity, the community, or how about this, servicing the community you live in, you could probably figure out the things you have not done. Blood donation's one of them. Donating clothes that you don't want anymore is another. That's donating foods, as little as it might be, a can of food here and there helps a lot of families who can't even get a can. So there's little things. I'm not even talking about going outside your community, like doing something grandiose or something like that, or like, shoveling, cutting down the big redwood tree. I'm just talking about in your neighborhood, right?
That's right.
If you service your community, your neighborhood, you can help community.
It is so true that you say that, and I think the kind of stigma around blood is like, it doesn't matter, I don't need to do it, somebody will do it. It's always, I kind of look at it as the bystander effect. It's like when you have a crowd and there's an emergency and everybody freezes up because they're like, somebody's going to get to it, and nobody does anything because they're assuming that someone else is doing it. And in the world of blood, that is usually the perception that I have observed. And I think people don't realize that donating blood is something that requires all hands on deck.
Yeah.
And most people don't donate because they feel like they haven't been asked to donate, or they don't like needles, and that's why it's a sacrifice, because I haven't met a blood donor yet that came in there doing cartwheels like, where's that needle? I can't wait. Like, come on. Nobody's a fan of needles, but I often tell people, if you have a condition where literally now you're fainting, and having the needle brought out causes a series of physical reaction, that's different. But if it's just, hey, I don't like it, but I'll tolerate it, because I know there's a patient right now at Johns Hopkins Hospital waiting, counting on, praying and hoping that a blood donor is stepping up. And in our area, if you're donating blood here in the Baltimore, DC, or Virginia area, you can almost guarantee that blood is going back into the community, because of the extent of the care that Johns Hopkins delivers. And then, of course, University of Maryland being our second largest recipient of that donated blood. And I just want to quickly share that many people don't realize that blood is not just for a person that's in need of a blood transfusion because they're in surgery, right. A cancer patient.
Yes.
They need those products to be able to really survive chemo and the other treatments that they sustain. And then you have people that are, finding out much later in life that they're being diagnosed with things like leukemia and some other cancers. But also your mother that's giving birth that may have experienced more bleeding than is normal. And I can tell you, just in my immediate circle, I know several women on their second, third, fourth child ended up needing a blood transfusion because that particular birth experience, they're not all the same. So you don't know. You never know. You don't know if you're going to be in a car accident. You don't know if you'll have a family member.
Is it a hard thing to say something is so direct as if you have not given blood, you just don't care about others? Is that a hard statement to say? I mean, can you give someone a pass because of what? Now, I know I'm unable to give blood anymore because of malaria, right?
Right.
And I know people who have given blood, or because in blood, there's a lot of products that come from just blood. There's, the plasma. There's a lot of things that can be separated from it. And there's people I know who hate needles. My mother hated needles, and she would give blood. My mother, when she was alive, she was just terrified. She would do this, right? She would have her, she would do but she would do it because she knew the effects of giving. Right. Like her service to community was greater than her own fears. So going back to my question, can we say that? Is that a hard thing to say to someone?
I think it's a hard thing to say to someone. I think donating blood is a personal choice, but okay. I also believe that people are going to hide from that kind of act of generosity unless they are asked directly. I don't think many people have the insight to understand how important donating blood is, so they just don't think about it. And I can tell you, I've had people that refuse to host a blood drive because they just didn't want to do it, only to be contacted a year down the road because they've had a member of their church or a family member that life was saved because of blood, and so they've had a change of heart. And so I think it's really
that's disturbing.
A little harsh to say that they're a bad person. I think either they just don't understand the impact and the power that they have just by donating blood, or either they just don't understand that it's literally immediately going to a patient that's in need. It's not just collected and thrown in a freezer somewhere.
That's actually quite disturbing when we say our religious centers, wherever you want to call them, because people call them different things, mosques, synagogues, churches, our religious centers, and how they might refuse to host something that is specifically for their congregation and the community. That kind of makes me shiver with great sadness.
Yeah. I think, and I think it's a big part of the education piece, because
Okay.
churches are pillars of the community.
Right.
Like, when a person has nowhere else to go, they know, no matter the faith or the denomination of that faith-based organization, you can usually count on some level of support or guidance. And so I think with our faith-based communities and partners from those communities, it's just a matter of feeling like they have the resources to do something like a blood drive. And that's why I say the education is a big piece, because if you have the space, that's really 90% of the battle. And
because you take care of the rest. I mean,
We'll
your
take care of the rest.
literally job is literally taking care of the rest.
Literally, we take it from there, which is why, we found ourselves revisiting what we would consider a typical blood drive location because of COVID. It really knocked everyone down for a bit, but we had to quickly pivot because the need for blood, like in any disaster, those things don't go away. You still have patients that are scheduled for their treatment, and things was on the back burner for a very short while until hospitals figured out how can we safely treat our other patients while addressing COVID. And so we've had to go back and revisit how we were running blood drives to make sure we're delivering and running these events the safest way that we can. And I will tell you, it has been the faith-based community. It has been the organizations that have really saved us, that have opened their doors, because they're like, well, unfortunately, we can't have service anyway, and we want to put this blessing to use. And so they've opened their doors generously to us, and many other partners continue to work with us and think out of the box and find ways that they can also help.
I know I want you to say it now and again later, but if people want to, they know of a space, they hear of a space, they can either contact me directly between my social media, the things where you see this, hear this, give this when you watch the show. But if they just hear of a space and they want to get to do something, how do they contact the American Red Cross? I mean, it sounds easy. You just look up and dial American Red Cross. You probably get someone and say, I want to, and we'll get you right. They'll get you right to the right space. But is there a direct line or issue?
There is a really easy way, probably easier than getting on the phone, for those with access to internet, because I can't assume everybody could just jump on their phone or a computer, but that would probably be the next best way. And you would go to Red Cross Blood, not redcross.org, because that's going to take you to our entire portfolio to cover everything that we do, from disaster to immunizations across the world, but not domestic, but we do deliver things like measles in third world countries and places where children are dying at an alarming rate over preventable diseases. So a lot of times people think we're also involved in the COVID vaccines. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. We're not. We don't do any vaccines here domestically. That's a separate program internationally. But as far as finding out if you qualify or if your space could be suitable, you would go to redcrossblood.org. And once you get there, you click the tab that says host a blood drive.
There it is.
And then it'll ask you a couple of questions, and it'll direct that inquiry to the right person. And then that person would reach out and ask a couple more questions, and then arrange for someone from our team to come out and take a look at the space. Or if they know off the top, hey, we've done blood drives here years ago, we've got 2,000 square feet of space, it's not being used, we tend to know that those spaces are good to go. And one of your contacts just reached back out, and we will be good to go with the previous blood program that you and I talked about. So I'm really excited.
That's
I'll
exciting.
talk to you about that. I'll catch you up on all of that. But I just want to let you know, thanks to your efforts, there's going to be a few more blood drives taking place in the community, in the Howard County community.
That's awesome. That's a beautiful thing. I mean, we there's so much more work to do. Now, when it comes to COVID, now people are really, right, on COVID. Explain how clean the process is of giving blood during the COVID. How is... Because I've been there with you. I've watched you work. You're an amazing person. You're a little bit. It's like you move so fast. It's like you're seven of you. I don't know how you do it, but explain that process.
Sure. So that's a really great question. And I think that's also what shut a lot of people down. They're like, I'm not donating blood. There's too much happening. And I will tell you, we were probably one of the first organizations to really take things to a new level of disinfecting our environment. And so what I mean by that is we've always had safety measures and protocols that we follow, but we currently meet and exceed the recommended guidelines that were put out by the FDA and the CDC. And what we're doing is we are sanitizing any donor touch surface, from a chair to a table to a device, anything that a donor could potentially touch. We are sanitizing those areas with a medical grade, a really high quality medical grade solution that you would find in hospitals and environments like that. That's what we're using in the field. We are asking donors to sanitize upon arrival. So they might say, hey, I just washed my hands. Well, we don't really know that. If you're coming to donate, we're going to ask you to partake in a little squirt of hand sanitizer, because the next thing they will have to do is check in. So we are making everything as touchless as possible, including a temperature check. So once you arrive and we know that you have an appointment, we are checking temperature of that donor, which means if you register at a temperature higher than our threshold, we're not allowing that individual to come in to the blood drive to donate. And so our standard for that is also a little more sensitive than what you might find in some other areas. We have a threshold of 99.5. There are a lot of places out there that'll let it register to 100 or 100.2, but our threshold, we're like 99.5. If you're there or above, we're going to ask you to wait it out, monitor your temperature for the rest of the day. We're not saying you have COVID, but what we are saying is that because an elevated temperature is one of the signs that can oftentimes go unnoticed, we can't afford to take that risk. So, and everyone is required to wear a mask from the beginning to the end of the process.
And there's a sign-up issue, so you're not waiting online. It's not like there's a bunch of people waiting online and you get in when you fit in. No,
that's right.
You have to definitely sign up, and so you come when you sign up, and there's space in between so people can rest and get their orange juice and their food, and so they can head on out, and then so that it just works so smoothly.
Yes, and I'm so happy you had the chance to see that. In the age of COVID, what a blood drive actually looks like, because we did in the past allow folks to just kind of, hey, I saw that you guys are doing a blood drive, I want to donate. We can't do that anymore. You do need to go through some screening questions as you're making the appointment to make sure you don't fall in a category where we might say, hey, due to the current environment, we're going to ask that you delay your blood donation. And so we've taken those precautions where we are pre-screening, we are sanitizing, and we've even stepped up our measures of sanitizing, and we're also making sure that everyone that is there should be there.
So have the vans stopped? Because we don't see the vans anymore.
Right. We had to take our blood mobiles. They were affectionately called the blood mobile. We've taken those out of the field right now because we still have not felt that that's a good use of resources, because if we social distance on that bus, now we're talking one donor per 30 minutes versus an environment where we used to do 3 or 4 donors at a time on the bus. But we can't do that right now, even with the mask, and it just isn't, we haven't been advised by our scientific advisory council that that's a good use of that resource right now. So we've just taken it out of the field, and it probably won't be back anytime soon, because we just don't know what's going to happen.
Maybe we turn into a food truck.
That's a great idea. And you are on the board, though, Dr. Dyer. You might be able to get some kind of event going that's not relating to blood drives with the blood mobile.
Right, because we might as well turn into a food truck and hire some great food.
I mean, the way the blood mobile looks, though, the beds are there. It's a very fixed. It's not the type of unit where we can pull stuff out. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like once you get on board. It's really tight, and the beds are there, and they really can't be moved. They are a part of that blood mobile.
So let's talk about, before we take off, I want to talk about how blood drives and the invention of it. So let's
talk about history.
Yes.
So this is probably something that I love sharing because so many people don't know, but the history of Blacks and African Americans with this organization goes back really to the beginning. The Red Cross was founded about 140 years ago by Clara Barton, one of my favorite human beings. She was well beyond her time. But one of her closest confidants and advisors was Frederick Douglass.
Right.
And many people don't know that his involvement and his impact on the organization remains with us today. In fact, Frederick Douglass was one of the first people to sign the Articles of Incorporation to legitimize the American Red Cross, that his position in the deeds office back in the day when he was blazing all kinds of trails, but his signature was one of the first. There were 5 signatures on that original document, and he was such a trusted source to the founder of this organization that it was a huge accomplishment for her to be able to capture that groundbreaking moment in history and for him to be one of the original signers on that historical document. So our history goes back that far. But I won't talk much about Clara Barton and the amazing things that she did to really defy the odds back in her day. But I want to just talk about a few of the notable American treasures that happen to be African American that contributed to this organization. And I'm going to have to start with, after mentioning Frederick Douglass, Dr. Charles Richard Drew. Dr. Charles R. Drew is the father of blood banking, and it was his brilliance and his groundbreaking discovery that led us to the ability to understand the importance of plasma. And he is the father of the methodology that's used today in science for something like preserving blood, separating blood. And if it wasn't for his genius, we wouldn't even be able to do convalescent plasma, which is an emergency authorized treatment for very severe COVID cases. But it was his brilliance that paved the way and single-handedly changed medicine. So Dr. Drew was our first medical director. We began collecting blood on the scale that it became an actual part of what we do back in 1940. So we were very blessed and fortunate to have Dr. Charles Drew pioneer the way for us. So I like to always give credit to Dr. Charles Drew because it was his brilliance that paved the way for what we do in the blood world today.
And that to me, you know, again, I love history, I love science, and then to know what a lot of Blacks who don't participate in things that we've been such an amazing part of to be where we are today, to not contribute to that historical lineage.
Yes.
And that's
wow. I agree with you. I feel like we have a personal responsibility because we paved the legacy of greatness that the American Red Cross continues to uphold today. And many people don't know, but Mary McLeod Bethune was instrumental in developing the relationship, domestic and overseas, with the Black communities and the American Red Cross. I mean, her role and her participation was just revolutionary, being a woman and then a Black woman at that, to have the kind of influence that she did on both the Black and white community. So Mary McLeod Bethune, she's another trailblazer that was a part of the committee that really was instrumental in bridging the gap locally and nationally with Red Cross in other departments across the administration. I mean, in fact, she was an advisor to President Roosevelt and was the highest ranking African-American person in his government during that time. So it was her influence with the political spectrum as well as her influence on the Black community that she brought to the American Red Cross and really began the foundation for recommending Blood Plasma Project, which continue to evolve. She blazed the trail.
I have to give you my ultimate compliment, saying that I think you're part of that next level of blazing the trail for African Americans, and you being a woman doing the work you have done, you are doing, and will continue to do, because it is your passion. I've known for the first time we met the glow you have and what you're doing in that service is, to me, I think that just speaks volume of what you are doing and who you are. And I think that's amazing. So congratulations to you. And
thank you, Dr. Dyer.
Because it is. You just are. And it's not about what couldn't you do. It's how I can fix it to make it work. And that's how you work. And I think that's amazing. So a lot of people don't have that inside their hearts where they're like, oh, you can't do it. Oh, well. You're like, wait, I got an idea. So, and that's a makeup that just God gave you. And so thank you for sharing it with the rest of us.
It's my pleasure. And it's my privilege to stand in the footprints of the many that came before us, and the many that, like yourself, that continue to break down barriers and make a way out of a way that maybe wasn't seen before. So I have to say that you are in that same category of change makers, and what you're doing for the community, and what you have done and what you continue to do. And all the great things that are on the horizon. So it's a privilege to be here with you today, as we both have really tall orders to fill, looking at those that came before us.
So again, how can people want to sign up for a blood drive, or they go to what again?
So for those that want to either donate blood, or if they think that they have a space or access to a space that could really do the community some good by hosting a blood drive, they would go to www.redcrossblood.org. And that's where the journey would begin. And hopefully they get me.
They probably will. If they don't get you the first time, they get you the second time. And if they don't get you the second time, you'll make sure you meet them there when they get there. So.
Exactly. Yeah, so there's definitely a need, and we're really excited about our newfound vision in terms of how can we better serve patients with sickle cell disease, and how can we better serve the Black and the African American community. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our Latino brothers and sisters, because there's a lot of work happening internally and externally where we continue to make sure that these underserved communities understand we are here. There are resources here for those communities. We want to continue to be trusted by those communities, and we want to engage those communities, not just for their blood, but for our workforce, for our volunteers. We want our leadership to reflect the population as well.
Thank you so much, Meosha. I'd love to have you. We're going to have you back again. Not obviously, but we are, because we need to talk more about blood. We need to talk more about getting people out. And I don't want to shame people. And I got an inbox already saying, "Why are you trying to shame people into giving blood?" Trust me, I am not trying to shame you. When I'm asking the question for you to think about why you haven't done. Yeah, that's why I really want you to think about why you haven't given service to your own self. Think of it that way.
Yes, and you can save 3 lives with one donation, and it's going to make you feel so great, because you will know where your blood is going once that blood is pulled or called for by the hospital. So it's not you give up your blood and nothing happens. It is a life-changing experience, and if you think that you can't, give us a call. We'll let you know if there's any questions on your mind. Oh, I traveled. Oh, I have a tattoo. Oh, I'm on blood pressure. All of those things, many of those things are myths as to why you can't donate. But if you have a very specific medical or health-related concern, please give us a call, and we can address those at 1-800-RED-CROSS. We can certainly address any questions you might have about being eligible. But take the first step and make that commitment. There are 3 patients right now counting on you. So.
Thank you, sister. You have a beautiful night. And
You
thank
as
you,
well,
everyone,
Dr.
for watching
Dyer.
on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Share, like, love, but make sure you
Yay.
service others. Thank you.
And I will share this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.